Um, I want to talk to you guys about something kind of interesting that I feel like we don't talk about enough in nursing school or in the nursing profession, and that is how to overcome our individual fears and like the things that make us squeamish when we're at work or at school. This could be anything from passing out at the sight of needles, passing out because of a smell, getting like really nauseous, working with bodily fluids and things like that. So if this is not for you, you do not have to watch this video. But if this is something that you struggle with, guess what? You're not alone, because I went through nursing school, and even prior to, I passed out almost any time at the sight of a needle. So this is my story about how I overcame that and some tips on how you can overcome it too. Also, before I forget, Karibu Tena, welcome back. If you guys are new here, hi, my name is Maddie. I am a nurse. I've been a nurse for almost 1 year now. I can't believe that. It's so crazy how quickly time flies. But I have this channel here to help nursing students, nurses, and other healthcare workers, just providing bits of information that I've accumulated throughout my nursing school journey and my journey as an ICU nurse in the cardiovascular ICU. And just what it's like to be in healthcare as a whole. So if you're new here, welcome. We're happy to have you. And if you're not, hit the subscribe button, because I want to continue to produce this content for you returning people. And the best way for me to do that is when you guys hit the subscribe and the like button and leave me a comment. So without me promoting myself further and getting kind of cringy, let's finally get into the video for a second time. Okay, so let's talk about this. I'm gonna start with my story and then kind of go from there. So hopefully this doesn't sound like a ramble, but I just want to be open with you guys about my struggles and what happened to me and how I overcame my fear of needles. To start with, I should clarify that I wasn't necessarily afraid of needles, but I had this thing where anytime people would start an IV and take a little too long or draw blood, I would get woozy and pass out. And nobody really talked about it until I had the chance to shadow an ED nurse before I started actually going to nursing school. I was into my prerequisites, so I was in my second year of school in college, and I hadn't quite yet applied to nursing school, but I was just around the corner from doing so, and I was shadowing an ED nurse. Fortunately, he had to start like a dozen IVs. So on the very first IV that he had to start, it was a very hard stick because the individual he was trying to get an IV on was very dehydrated, so it was hard. And mind you, anytime I get blood work done or shots done, it does not bother me. For some reason, it was only when I watched other people that it would trigger this effect for me, and I would have like a syncopal episode. So it's different for everybody. For some people it's reverse, where they can watch it, but if it's on them, that's when they have a syncopal episode. So this was the first time I'd really sat down and watched somebody do an IV, and I should preface with the fact that I was not sitting down, I was standing up with my knees locked. So if you have heard anything at all about passing out or have experienced it or work in healthcare, you know that the number one thing that you don't want to do is lock your knees, and I learned the hard way. So I'm watching this nurse put in a very hard IV, and all of a sudden I realize the room is spinning a little bit and I'm starting to get a little bit nauseous. So I'm like, okay, maybe I need to move around, because I had already locked my knees for a while, so I was smart enough to at least move around a little bit. But all of a sudden it just hit me so fast, probably within like 15 seconds of the nurse trying to get in and dig around a little bit to get the IV, which he's great at getting IVs, I will say that. But about 15 seconds in, I'm like, okay, this isn't working, I need to sit down. So all I told the nurse was, hey, I'm gonna run to the bathroom, because I was too embarrassed to tell him what was going on. I made it just outside the door to the wall in the hallway, and I slid down to my butt, and I couldn't really see anything. I could still hear, but my ears were ringing and things were getting a little dark. As soon as I sat down, it started to get a little bit better. My only issue was that I stood up way too soon. So just when I thought I was better, I wasn't. And I stood up and I slank back down and the room pretty much went black. I could still hear, but the next thing I knew, I heard the ED nurse saying, "Hey, I'm gonna just lay you down and elevate your feet." I don't know if you've ever worked with someone who's passed out before, but this is what you want to do with someone who's passed out. You want to check their blood sugar, check their blood pressure, get your vitals. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna call in a buddy to check your vitals. And he was so calm and collected. And the whole time I'm on the floor like, okay, sounds good. I'll make a mental note of that, because the poor dude was still trying to teach me, which was great. I'll never forget what he taught me because it was in the moment when I myself was passing out. But he was still teaching me what to do, which I thought was phenomenal while I was having a syncopal episode. So basically he elevated my legs so that the blood would come back to my brain. And somebody got me some orange juice, checked my blood sugar, it was fine, checked my blood pressure, it was very, very low. And after a few moments, I was wheeled back to the break room. And I remember sitting there by myself because the ED was crazy. And they told me to come out when I was ready, that there was no rush, but everybody had to go back to their job. And I remember sitting back there in that break room by myself, and I just started crying. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I pass out at the sight of one IV, how the heck am I going to go to nursing school and do the job that I want to do in the ICU or OR, because I hadn't made a decision yet. I'm like, how on earth? What am I gonna do? And I just started crying. And then after a few minutes, I kind of sucked it up and I had a moment to myself drinking my orange juice. And I'm like, you know what? I feel like this is what God's called me to. And I don't know whether you guys feel like having a vocation or calling from the Lord is something that you seek out in your life, but it's certainly something that I did. And I felt like I was called to it. For some people, they just know what they're called to. And I'm like, you know what? If this is what I was called to, and this is what I feel passionate about, which I really do, I'm loving this environment, then nothing should stop me from going forward. And I basically just told myself that I had 2 years in nursing school to overcome this. And if I had to watch 1,000 IVs being placed before I stopped passing out, then that's exactly what was going to have to happen. That's the only pep talk that I've really ever had with myself, because this is one of the only things that I've ever been so driven about. So I realized that it's hard to kind of have that type of pep talk with yourself, especially when you're by yourself drinking orange juice and the room's dark and your ears are ringing. But sometimes that's what you have to do with yourself, because look where it's got me now. I'm in my dream job and pretty much nothing phases me at this point. So I got back up on my feet. I decided not to watch the IV being put in for about an hour, but once I had a snack and felt better, I went back and watched him finish placing his IV, and this time I did not lock my knees. And even the nurse that I was shadowing came out and said, listen, it happens to everybody. I've seen it happen to med students, nursing students, nurses, even doctors. And sometimes it happens when you least expect it, even when you think you've overcome all of those queasy feelings. So don't get discouraged. And he's like giving me tips on not locking my knees, making sure I'm moving around, making sure I'm eating and staying hydrated before I come into work, making sure I'm sleeping well. And so all of those things were helpful, and those are things that I would pass on to you guys to do also to prevent from passing out. So about 2 semesters go by, and I'm finally in my spring semester, my first semester of nursing school. And guess what? On my second clinical ever, I passed out a second time. Watching what? An IV being placed, a hard stick. And this time they took my blood pressure and it was kind of embarrassing low. It was like 60/36. Not cute. And my clinical instructor was actually very calm while everybody else was freaking out. I almost had a rapid response, but it turned out okay. And I started practicing IVs the following semester on mannequin arms and things like that, and even a patient. And for some reason after that, sitting down, I realized that if I sit down to do it, it was better for me than standing up. I definitely have to sway and kind of move about anytime I've watched an OR procedure, and I definitely definitely had to eat and drink my coffee beforehand because I kind of have a naturally low blood pressure, and coffee helps raise it just slightly, and being hydrated does too. So to kind of more of a normal level. So I had to absolutely make sure that I ate, drank, and had coffee before I went to clinical. So those were some tidbits that I would share with you guys. So even though I passed out, it wasn't quite as often. I was still able to watch IVs and even do a few of my own. And I finally thought, this is over. I don't have this issue anymore. And then I think my junior year, I followed the skin wound ostomy team. So I kind of went from the needle thing, the IV thing, to suddenly a smell thing that I hadn't experienced before. And this poor patient had a necrotic ostomy. If you don't know what that is, an ostomy is basically where they take part of your intestine and bring it to the outside, and they have a pouch over top of it to basically collect your poop, to put it in terms. And some people it's temporary, some people it's permanent. They make cute little sleeves to go with it these days, which are cool. And if you've ever gone through that, I feel for you, but you are such a trooper. But for this unfortunate person, their ostomy had become necrotic, which means that the stoma site, so the actual intestine portion, instead of being pink and red like a normal intestine should be, it was black and it was stinky, and something had gone wrong. And I won't get into the details, but basically this nurse had to pull off the old ostomy, take pictures of it, make sure that it was taken care of appropriately. But as soon as that smell hit me, and I had not eaten breakfast at all that morning, I had not had coffee, and I had not had water, and I had not slept hardly at all. As soon as the smell hit me and I saw that necrotic stoma, that was it for me. I made it to the door and I slumped over, and somehow I like crawled my way out of the room without the patient seeing me, because that was the last thing I wanted. I crawled out of the room into the hallway and made it to a desk before somebody came over and was like, hey, you're in my seat. And I, white as a ghost, looked at them and I'm like, can I have another seat then, please? And then they realized that I had basically passed out. It was kind of a funny moment. So at that point, I actually did get rapid response. So if things can't get more embarrassing than basically passing out and having to crawl across a hospital floor, getting rapid response can sometimes be embarrassing. Necessary, but embarrassing. And I had an ICU nurse come and do orthostatic vitals with me, which, if you don't know what that is, basically means checking your heart rate and your blood pressure when you're lying flat on your back, when you're sitting upright, like on the side of a bed, and then when you're standing up as well. And if you have a drop in your blood pressure between lying and sitting, or sitting and standing, then you have what's called orthostatic hypotension, which just means that your blood pressure drops and your body doesn't know how to compensate for it. So at that point, I'd already recovered, gotten my crackers and orange juice again, and my blood pressure was okay. I just had to kind of remove myself from that situation. And I luckily did not have to go to the emergency department, but I was embarrassed as heck, because basically an entire unit had come to my rescue to make sure that I was okay. And I got teased about it for a while, but I'm here to tell you that despite all of that, to this day, I have not passed out. And I have learned my lesson about eating and drinking before going to work, making sure that I get sleep, making sure I don't lock my knees, and just learning that it's okay to have to face that type of scenario a couple of times before getting used to it. And after a while I did. I worked as a CNA to kind of improve my chances of exposure and not passing out over time. And after a while, it got a lot better. And like I said, to this day, I don't have any issues, and I've kind of learned my lesson. So you may have to do different things that work for you. It may take literally 100 times of exposure before it stops happening. And I just learned recently, which I don't know why I didn't know about it, that if you do have a phobia of needles or instances like that, there are ways for healthcare workers to actually like get that treated, where they like expose you a couple times, do the same thing, and make sure they help you like get used to it. So I don't know how that process goes. I know Dr. Mike talked about it in a YouTube video, so maybe he knows a little bit more about it, and maybe you guys can YouTube it or Google it. But I do know that that is an option, and I kind of wish I had known about that beforehand. I kind of learned the hard way. But yeah, those are all the tidbits that I have for you guys, and I just don't want anybody to feel alone and feel like you can't overcome that, because here I am in the cardiovascular ICU watching open heart surgeries every now and then, and open chest at bedside and assisting with those, and putting in countless IVs and taking out arterial lines and seeing wounds, and you name it. You can do it. So that's all I wanted to share with you guys in terms of my story, and I hope that you found it helpful. If you have a similar story or tips that you want to provide, once again, feel free to share those in the comments below. I love the community that we're building here and being able to share our experiences, and just remember to be kind to one another. I just love when we're able to share in this community, in this setting, and make others not feel alone but more empowered. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you all, and Tutu Nana. I will see you later.